best. This is the best advice, the best thing that I have ever learned, I think, as a Spanish teacher. This is, you don't need the whole set of commands. You don't need the whole thing. It's just what is that they are going to mean. Purpose. What do I mean when I say is the purpose communicative? Well, let's see what communication is. So communicative, right, means that it's an activity whose main purpose is not linguistic. That is, if you say, well, this activity is very good to practice the commands or the present perfect or to practice vocabulary, well, that is not a communicative activity. It might be another thing. I'm not saying that is not valid, but that is not, if your goal is that one, then your activity is not a communicative one. So a communication is an activity, a communicative activity is an activity whose main purpose is not linguistic and involves the interpretation or the negotiation on and expression of meaning within a context and with a purpose. So that is, the purpose is not linguistic. The purpose is to find out something that we don't know, to create something concrete, right? To get to a goal, right? That is not linguistic. So we're gonna see with much more clarity as we go on about what a communicative purpose is. So let's see in particular what is a task. So first and foremost, meaning is primary, right? The task is not about language practice, it's about conveying meaning somehow. That is the most important, I guess, characteristic. Then students are not given other people's meaning to regurgitate. That is realistic and student-centered. Students are using their own meanings, right? This is because, in the past, maybe in the present as well, you would give students dialogues, right, to practice and memorize, and this is not a task. The students have to convey their own meaning, from their own mind, right? It's gotta be from the students' own intentions. Then there is some sort of relationship comparable to real world activities, right? There must be an application outside of the classroom. It's useful for the students. This task is something that maybe humans do, outside of the classroom, or resembles things that, authentic things that we use with language, right? In the world outside of the classroom. Task completion has some priority. So the goal is to be able to do the task, not necessarily how well you do it, right? The goal is to complete, like in real life, right? In my task today is to give you this workshop in my second language, right? Well, the way I do it, my fluency, the way I use my English, my pronunciation might not be the most important thing. Did Claudia give you the workshop, and did Claudia really fulfill the goals that she said she was going to fulfill, okay, or to reach, okay? And then the assessment of the task is in terms of the outcome. So was the task completed or not? Did the students do it or not? That is the assessment, the main criteria for assessment. So take your activity, right? The one that you thought about, a few minutes ago, and see if it has all these characteristics. And if not, think about it, make a note, and we can talk about it, how to make it, or how to change it, or how to adapt it so it has these characteristics. Okay. And then I love this quote from Elisan Shintani that encapsulates what a task is. It says, task characteristics are directing at ensuring that a task results in language use, not language practice, language use, where students or learners treat the language as a tool for achieving a communicative outcome rather than as an object to be studied, analyzed, and displayed, right? So if your activity is today we're going to practice the future, well, that might be an activity, but it's not a task, right? That is not a task by any stretch of the imagination, okay? So this is something that we have to have in mind. And what a task is, right? And we have to compare the tasks with exercises. We can see, well, what is a target task? Is, we have a task and we have a target task. So the target task is a task, right? It has the same characteristics of a task that I just gave you, right, from Skehan. But what makes it a target task? Well, and that is very important to know this concept because within the TVLT framework, that is put forward by Michael Long, which is the one that I use or try to use in my program, right? A target task is what drives the curriculum, what drives your lesson plans, what drives your material. The target task is the queen, right, of your module, right, of your pedagogic unit. Okay, so I'm gonna start by giving you an example of a target task that I just did, that we do in Spanish for the fourth semester of the Spanish program at UIC, at the university where I work, and this is a target task that I just did last semester in the spring with my students. So this target task is what I'm going to prepare the students for, right? So let's see, this target task is to design and describe an object that solves an everyday problem to be evaluated by your peers in class with the purpose to select which is the best object, right? So this is a target task. So imagine that I tell you, okay, you have 5 days in your class to prepare students to do this. And so they're gonna give a presentation of the object. So now that I have my target task, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but now that I have it identified, what this target task is like, then I will be able to prepare the pedagogic unit. How many days do I need for my students in classroom, for my students to be prepared to do this task? What am I going to teach for them? What do they need to know linguistically, pragmatically, culturally to be able to give a presentation about this, right? How am I going to evaluate it? These are very important aspects that I won't have to cover today, unfortunately, but that if you see other videos from Extempore, I have lots of evaluation ideas to assess, these tasks. But how did I go about it? So the pedagogic unit, starts at the end, right? So in day 6, I put it, in my curriculum, we have 5 days to prepare these students for the final task. So the students have to design and present an object that resolves an everyday problem. Okay, so what I did in the previous 5 days was to do pedagogic tasks that will help students to do the final task. And as you can see, I'm gonna go a little bit tomorrow, we're gonna talk about these pedagogic tasks, but as you can see, these are tasks themselves. That is, they have an objective that is not linguistic, and students have to do something. So for example, the first one was to identify the object that seems to us the most interesting or innovative, right? So it was a task differently from this final task, right? And it was students read about several objects, and they have to read their qualities, right? And decide which was the most interesting or innovative. So they work in groups, and it took me like maybe most of the class to do it. So my lesson plan was directed, was my lesson plan, the goal of my lesson plan that day was to fulfill this objective with the materials that I created, that the textbook had for students to do that. So this is the pedagogic unit, right? As you can see it holistically. And your lesson plan is led, is guided by your final goal. Make this, concretize this task, right? What would you do? So as I said, how to select a task. I'm gonna give you, I'm gonna repeat that just for you to think, right? What are your students interested in, right? What do they need to want to do, to learn to do with additional languages? What tasks are they expected to do in other subjects? If I were in elementary school or in high school or in junior high school, maybe that would be a very good point of departure, right? Or what do people do in the real world outside of the classroom? The classroom is the real world as well. I'm not saying that it's not the real world. We are real people, right? But I'm saying the real world outside of the classroom, right? That need to do, or that is in additional language, or what will students like to do after graduation, that may require the use of additional language. Maybe some students want to go into volunteering for political campaigns, right? Like for university students in Chicago, for example, right? And maybe they would like to know, I would like to know, make a phone call, and talk about, people and encourage people to vote. How do I do that in Spanish? You know, it's a necessary thing to do, for example, right, etc. And as I think that you are already thinking, right? Oh, let me see what task I could give my students to do, right? So as you select your target task, try to answer these questions. And I'm gonna give you, I mean, I can't see the chat if there are some questions before I give you, like, I don't know, maybe I'll give you 5 minutes or 3 minutes to think, to draft, you know, your target task. Then you're going to share it with a partner, and Grant's gonna give me we are gonna put you in breakout rooms with only one person, right? And share it with a partner, just to see. You don't have to put the whole thing right together, but just share, discuss with a partner if this task would work or not for your students. How do you know? How do you know? So I'm going to give you some examples, so some things to consider. So answer this question: why this task? In what ways this task is going to help my students? Why this particular task for my students? What is the nature of this target task? This is a very important thing, you know. And for me, it was very difficult with my target task of leaving a voicemail, you know, for a candidate. It was very difficult. Well, not very difficult, but it was challenging for me to know the nature, because I'm not an expert in political campaigns, you know. So I don't know exactly what is that a volunteer has to do. But nevertheless, we need to know the nature of this task. What does it require to be completed? How do you know when it is completed? How do you know when the students are done, right? How would you implement it in 2 days, 1 day, you know, class, in my program, we implement the target task, the whole class session, 50 minutes, you know, it's just for the target task, the culmination of the unit, right? And how would you do it? For example, for this task that was to design an object, students had to know from the beginning, you know, these target tasks, and they had to design the object before they presented in class, right? So it was this type of implementation that we need to, you know, to think about in terms of management, you know, the students. What do students need to know linguistically, pragmatically, and cultural, right? So that is a very, very important thing, because the nature of the task is going to drive the language. So you have, you know, the task is a limited thing, and you are going to select what students need to learn linguistically, what grammar, vocabulary, expressions, etc. You know, pragmatic things that they need to learn according to the task. The task limits that content. This is the best advice, the best thing that I have ever learned, I think, as a Spanish teacher. You don't need the whole set of commands. You don't need the whole thing. It's just what is that they are going to need. That's it. And most likely at the beginning, at least, I think maybe afterwards, is expressions, fixed expressions, chunks. We're going to see that tomorrow more clearly, right? But it is important, right? What is that my students need to learn, right?